Mr. Chandrasekharan, Mr. Vastupal, Mr. Shiv Kumar, Ms. Rekha Sethi, Mr. Bhargav, Dr. Preeta Reddy ji, ladies and gentlemen, a very good afternoon, and my apologies for walking in late. And I was telling Mr. Vastupal that it took me less time to fly from Delhi to Mumbai than it did from where I was staying to come to town. But that's the joy of being in Mumbai. But it's a real pleasure to be here. And before I begin, I want to congratulate IMA for really consistently putting up these conferences and events and conventions which bring together a whole set of people from different backgrounds and to honor and reward associations, young people, professionals from all parts of the country. And I have been at IMA events, I think for the nth time, Rekha ji. And I don't know why they don't get tired of calling me. But I enjoy myself every time I come and listen to speakers at various events. It's always good for policymakers to keep themselves refreshed. For all the criticism, positive and sometimes extremely critical, it's important for people to listen, to learn, and hopefully act on what we hear. I was very keenly listening to what Mr. Bhargav was talking about, and I think he gave us a lot of points, a lot of ideas to think upon just before you all have lunch. I wanted to spend a few minutes talking about things that are very pertinent today in our policy making, to our economy, to our country. And I say this not as a minister in this government or as a lawmaker in parliament, but as someone who's seen the Indian economy turn itself in the last 2 decades. And I often give the example that my generation of politicians will be remembered or not remembered for the kinds of economic opportunity we are able to provide to our current generation. As you will recall, post-independence, the fight and the struggle and the war that we fought was really for getting social equity, for justice, and I think in the late 70s and 80s, it was all about establishing the roots of our democracy and fighting for equality and participative democracy. I think we have more than established ourselves as one of the most robust democracies in the world. The challenge for the last 15, 20 years has been to establish India's economic strength as a global power. And I think it's wrong if someone says that we have not been able to do that. There's been enough demonstration in the economic indicators. I don't want to go into details, but I think the world recognizes today that India is a major player, not just because of our large population, but because of our trillion-dollar economy, the things we've done. And we have done a tremendous amount in the last 6 decades. But one thing that we cannot do is to take our growth for granted. Just as in life, nothing is for granted. And while walking down, just as an aside, we were talking about one peon in a government office walking out of a minister's door and saying that this minister lost his mind because he's yelling at me. Now, he's the guy who's temporary and I'm the permanent employee. Nothing is permanent. But what we can do is to discharge the responsibility that we have for the moment and give it our best. You heard about the fear psychosis that has somehow crept into the lower bureaucracy and the bureaucrats of our country sometimes, and perhaps even politicians, where decision-making is taking more concern, more effort. People are safeguarding themselves and creating buffers around so that everything else can happen, but their judgment should not be questioned. And to my mind, that's not possible. But if you have the intentions that you're supposed to have, you take decisions given the information that you have, and you do it for the best interest of the country without taking sides and being prejudiced. No matter how often you make mistakes, the people, the society, the media will never question the decision you make. That, I think, is also a perception issue. And perception correction today, I think, is the need of the hour. It will take efforts not just of political parties or governments, but it will also take the efforts of the industry, of the corporate sector, of civil society, of media, of all of us, because we have a far larger responsibility than just our job today. Like I was saying earlier, we have got to create jobs. This economy will only sustain its 6, 7, 8% growth rate if we are able to have that job creation take place. The ministry that I work in, the Ministry of Telecommunications and IT, has been growing at between 15 to 20% every year. And I take great pride in saying that we are adding about 7% of our GDP just in the IT sector. But what we've done is actually not been able to catch the bus on the manufacturing sector. Our IT-enabled services today, we are exporting $100 billion. We have a target of doing $300 billion by 2020. Now that's great, it's fantastic, because companies like the large IT Indian companies now are global brand companies. But what we have to do is to fill the gap which we've not been able to do successfully for the last 2 decades, is the manufacturing sector. Today, the domestic demand is only in India, for the electronics good, white goods, all inclusive, is about $45 billion. In the next 8 years, it will grow to $400 billion, 10x. And why must we be reliant upon other countries to feed our population for all the electronic goods that we require? Because India is today an aspirational country. People across the nation, whether small towns, villages, large cities, are demanding a better way of life. And material goods. And that reminds me of another comment that Mr. Bhargav made about conspicuous consumption, north versus south. I think Mumbai is the last place you want to talk about north and south and talk about who's consuming and who's conspicuous. But the fact is that people are demanding electronic goods as a way of life. And that's where, again, as a part of my ministry, we have made special efforts to make sure that the growth momentum that we're all looking for, we're able to achieve. Because we have the raw material, we have the designing capabilities, we have the engineering capacities, we have a large workforce, cheap labor. There is no reason why we cannot compete with the best in the world. And to be the manufacturers, not just for this country, but perhaps be the supplying source for the rest of the world. It will take a lot of concentrated effort. It will require governments of states, central government to work together and open up those avenues. I think a small push also will be given through the new government's decision, which is the FDI in retail, which we have mandated some percentage of sourcing from India, which is now mandatory. No country in the world has ever put those conditions. And again, it's how you perceive that policy decision. I don't think it is going to change life, an investment in the retail sector. And we as Indians have got to start thinking of ourselves as what we are, and not some small island nation that I was reading a speech by some member of the opposition who was saying that now the FDI and retail is opened up. So what happened 300-400 years ago was a company called East India Company came into India, and then we all know what happened and blah, blah, blah. And I want to ask the gentleman the question that just because McDonald's is now in India, do we stop eating pav bhaji or samosas or kachoris? We still eat that. There's enough room. In fact, we have made McDonald's come up with a new dish called I think it's called Mekalu Tikki Burger and Chicken Tikka Burgers, etc. So there's enough space for foreign companies to come and invest here, to create the jobs. 25 years ago, we had 2 options to buy a car, an Ambassador or a Fiat. And it also reflects as to how old I am, but I remember when cars were bought, radial tires were not mandatory. I mean, they were added after the car was purchased. Not all cars came with air conditioners. But today, you take it for granted. That's because we have options. We have companies, both Indian and foreign, who have come and made investments in this country, made employment a reality. And if we have to shift 500 million people from the agricultural field that are employed today in the farming sector into productive contributions, we'll have to go through the phase of manufacturing. There's no reason why we can't do this. We've got to create the opportunities for people to take advantage of that. The economy has grown between 7.5 to 8% in the last 8 years. Despite the global negative sentiments, I think we've done reasonably well. But now is the time. I think we're at a turning point. When I'm saying this, India is at a turning point, is because we've got to rise above a 6-month timeline or a 1-year timeline for the political fortunes of the ruling party or the opposition party. Because the people judge politicians as one entity. I think the lines are getting blurred where people are actually thinking about this is ideology of X and this is ideology of Y. Now it's about tangible results. Which set of people, what set of policies, which governments, which political entities are actually delivering on the ground. If you're able to make a tangible difference in people's lives, and people, Indian voters, I think, are smarter than anybody else. They realize and they see what's good for them. They don't have to be told, and they don't have to be coached or tutored into what's beneficial for them. They see the realities, and they're able to take advantage of that when it presents to them. The perception issue, I think, is a very pertinent one. Sometimes it seems that nothing is going right. And within a few months, a few steps are taken, and suddenly it's a turnaround. We've got to be less fickle than that. And I think people who are able to create these images with their opinions, with what they say, need to be a tad more responsible in how we are ushering this country into where we want it to be. There is no reason why the economy cannot come back to its 8, 9, 10% growth rate. But GDP growth rate is not the only agenda that a country can work in or work for. I think the point mentioned earlier was about the disparities that we see today in India. And for me, frankly speaking, it's one of the biggest concerns that I have, that the disparity between the people who are earning, who are working, is becoming so large that we have got to interject. I don't think the curves of demand and supply or the market forces alone can deliver equitable life for all people. There is a responsibility that the government has to look after those sections of our population who don't have the means, the resources, the access, information, knowledge, at all, of even meeting the simplest requirements of daily life. How do you give that? That is a job, that is a constitutional job of the government. People call it populist, you can call it socialist, but for me, India is a country of not just the large metropolitan cities, but of 600,000 villages. And those are the people who need the most hand-holding. And I think the best and the brightest talent sometimes come from these unknown places. That's the kind of nurturing that we need to do. Even our education sector. It's not about how many engineers we churn out every year. We do about 500,000. But the quality of skills that they possess, are they really employable? Industry is always crying for people who have the required skill sets. I think the concept of doing those courses, teaching what makes young people employable is far more important than just having a certificate which says that you've graduated or done a master's or whatever. These are the kind of brass tacks things that sometimes we miss out. And I can assure you, as far as the government is concerned, we understand the responsibility that we have. There are 43 or 44 parties in parliament. We run a coalition government, and I think all of you have seen more than enough on display what that entails, which is to run a coalition government, to make decisions. And I think, frankly speaking, it's not just about taking decisions. It's about really implementing and executing the law that we already have, the reforms that we talk about. It's easy to make announcements. It's easy to take a policy decision despite the limited elbow room that you have running a coalition government. But that in itself will not suffice. It has to be the follow-up of those announcements, the investment to take place, the jobs to come. The greatest challenge we have is this young demographic dividend that I've been hearing for the last half decade. This will very quickly become a huge burden if we're not able to give these young men and women the kinds of opportunity that they require. And they don't require sympathy or compassion or some sort of out-of-the-way helping hand. They just require a platform to perform. You give them a good classroom, good teaching, good teachers, and they can compete. Young people today in India, I think, are able to compete with the best in the world. And I keep saying this at every platform. 20 years ago, India still had architects, lawyers, doctors, engineers. But today, a young person in India who's 20, 25 years old has a self-confidence to stand up and make a speech and make a PowerPoint presentation anywhere in the world, which we didn't have 25 years ago. The people were a little bit inhibited. And that's not because suddenly a new policy or a new government or we have internet or we have television. The simple reason is there are many countries around the world where young people don't have faith in the present or the future of that country. I won't take names, But in India, despite what you see in your television sets, despite what you hear and talk about, you ask a young man or young woman in this country, and they have fullest confidence and faith that our institutions are intact. We have the flexibility and the absorptive capacity to take in all the negatives that people throw at us and still forge ahead. Ultimately, this country is destined for better times. It will. And because young people have that confidence today, they're able to speak with confidence about their country, their present, and more importantly, they know the next 10, 20, 30 years, India will take its rightful position in the community of nations around the world. That confidence has now translated into the Excel and the PowerPoints that young people make today. I didn't see that 15 years ago. That is the real spirit of India. That is what we have to nurture. An institution is not about buildings and about how much money it has in its bank account or who runs it or the four walls that are well decorated. It's about the quality of learning that goes on there. I was listening to a speech of a politician from Singapore. So Singapore, as you know, is a country that survives on service industry. And there are many countries now, including India, where the proportion of our service industry in our GDP is going from strength to strength. And look at the far-sightedness of this person who was talking about how Singapore, being a financial services hub and a banking services hub, now is facing competition from other South Asian countries, from the Western world, perhaps even from India and maybe from Mumbai itself. But he said, now how do we sell young Singaporean talents? How do we make our mark at the global stage? So he went out and said that Singaporeans of today and Singaporeans of tomorrow have one thing which is their USP. That's their integrity. The ethics in which you can trust a Singaporean to handle your money, to do investments for you, and the kind of faith you can have in a lawyer and a doctor in Singapore is unmatched. I mean, they're taking out that soft skill of that country because of the transparency it has, because of the corrupt-free systems that they've got, and they're selling that potential USP to the world by saying the Singaporean banker, lawyer, doctor, or arbitrator is much more ethical than anybody else in the world. That's the differentiation they're trying to make. So this is a very, very competitive world. The 21st century is not meant for people who are going to take things for granted. And we cannot have a population in India that is reliant, that is dependent on something. And I say this because in my earlier comments, I was talking about how the government needs to extend a helping hand for education, for Medicare, for all sorts of food requirements for poorest of poor. That is the responsibility we have to discharge. But as a country, we've got to remain aggressive, focused, competitive, and I see no reason why we can't deliver. There's a long list that Mr. Bhargav was talking about, and I think all the points he made are very pertinent, seeing his long experience in the corporate sector and in the government. There's lots that needs to be done. But today is a time where we all have to make up our minds. We can discuss and deliberate, we can criticize and point fingers, we can stop taking the blame, keep passing the bucket, but this is all temporary. In the real long run, we look back, we don't want to be seen as someone who missed an opportunity. Because these are challenging times for the entire world. The whole world looks at India and how we can deliver. And not all forces around the world want India to succeed. Let me make that's my personal opinion. Nobody wants another shining star next to them in the lineup for a 100-meter dash. So not everybody around the world will want this country to succeed and to deliver to its potential. There will be forces which will try and make sure that there is some destabilization. But like I said, I've seen enough in our politics, I've seen enough in our parliament and outside of it to know that we can absorb a lot that goes on. Because we are flexible, we have a very robust and sometimes overly noisy democracy, which is sometimes good but sometimes bad. So therefore, we cannot as a country challenge our institutions. Individuals can be wrong. Policies can be questioned, can be flawed. But the institutions that our forefathers have created, the systems that we have in place, if we start challenging them, then we're looking at a very uncertain future. And like the corporate sector, what they don't like or what we don't like is an uncertain landscape. In terms of policy, there has to be clarity. In terms of the way forward, there should be no ambiguity. We can talk among ourselves, we can call ourselves good or bad, right or wrong. That's part of our right to discuss and to debate. But in the long run, we've got to have a clear path forward. We've got to have a policy making that is transparent, and more importantly, like I said, nothing serves the corporate sector better than clarity. And we're trying to get as much clarity as we can, at least in the ministry that I work in. We have a new telecom policy, we have a new IT policy, we have a new manufacturing policy, but the real proof of the pudding is in the eating. And that's where we've urged state governments to come forward and take advantage of these new policies that we've created so that we can deliver on the manufacturing, on the job creation, on empowering of our people. And finally, one last word about corruption and transparency. While I believe that we have the laws, we can make more laws in our parliament to make our systems more deliverable, more accountable. We have the RTI, now we have the Lokpal bill in parliament, which will get passed soon. But ultimately, how the world views us or how we view ourselves will change only when we are able to tackle the problem at the grassroots, at the lowest levels. Because what really hurts the poor person in India today is the SDO, the BDO, the local banker, the certification, the forms, the signatures, the no objection certificates, etc., etc., etc. And my ministry has now, we moved a bill in parliament. It's called the ESD, Electronic Service Delivery Bill. It's been referred to the standing committee. This bill basically entails every state government to give X number of their government services online. So once you have the removal of the human interference at the grassroots level, the person does not have to go pillar to post and buy mithai for all the government officers who work in the villages, but really at the click of a button in his or her local language. This bill is a very powerful piece of legislation once it'll get passed, and I want to reiterate this. At every step, we took all state governments on board. We took their views. We asked them what they like, what they don't want, what they want. And we as the government of India are going to give them all the money and all the support, all the logistics, all the systems, so that they can get their land records digitized. They can get their BPL cards, their ration cards, all identity using Aadhaar numbers to make the system in a data center digitized model where in Marathi, in Bangla, Kannada, Malayalam, whatever language, a simple person can go, press enter, take a printout, the digital signatures are there, recognized by law, there's no running around. And I think that sort of transparency, where the human interference is minimal at the grassroots level, will really, to my mind, transform the way the government interfaces with its citizens. So while we make the big laws in parliament, this particular bill, once it gets enacted, the time frame is 5 years for this to get totally implemented. But imagine how powerful that is going to be. Once you have optical fiber to every panchayat, 20,000 crores we're spending on putting optical fiber to every panchayat. And we are putting common service centers, and my ministry is also developing software in all the 22 languages, so people don't feel that they have to speak English and work on iPhone 5 for them to feel that they're part of the IT growth story. They should also be able to access on any instrument that they want, and these smartphones, which change every 6 weeks, become unsmart, and the new ones become smarter and smarter and smarter. We've got about 1 billion of those. So what happened in the telecom sector when we went from landlines, where we used to, on our business cards, used to have a name, and most people didn't have phones, so they used to have that PP number, which is the Padosi's phone. So he would call, you'll hold, and post 9 o'clock calls were cheaper. You'd be shouting, watching Ramayana at night, getting people to speak on the phone. That changed in 15 years. Today, we have a tele-density of almost 80%. That means 80 phones per 100 people. In 95, we had less than 1 phone for 100 people. The same transformation is going to happen in the internet broadband sector. Today, India has 121 million internet users, which is the 3rd largest in the world. Of course, China is number 1, then United States, and we are 3rd, 121 million. You will see this inflection point turn India to a country of 500 million people using internet. That's why issues of cybersecurity are so important, but more important is the fact that we are able to give people the access in regional languages, and that's where we'll be able to really harness the potential. So we're working at all these policy issues. We're trying to digitize our economy, create manufacturing hubs, get people motivated and trained to achieve bigger, better things for themselves, for their families, for their societies. But I think our contributions, along with the corporate sector and young professionals, associations, and I also wish to congratulate every one of those individuals who got those awards. And it really gladdened me to see people from smaller towns and associations from Tier 2, Tier 3 cities to come forward and take the rewards. I'm very glad I was able to be a part of this program, and I would like once again to thank IMA for bringing all of us together and to have me here to share some of my thoughts. Not everything I say sometimes, because I'm a professional politician, not everything I say is accepted or is agreed upon. But I think as long as we are able to listen and share about what we feel and our opinions are spoken about frankly, the people of India will judge us as a corporate sector, as a management trainee, as an association, as a minister, as a secretary, as a bureaucrat. People will judge us for what we deliver on the ground. And I think the best way to create the confidence in the people of India is by delivering, by having a clean heart, by making things transparent, and really by taking the decisions because your gut tells you to. I don't want tomorrow, I'm open to any query, any RTI question anybody has ever asked on anything I've done last 3.5 years, because my singular focus has been to be able to do better for this country, for our society. And because of that, anybody and everybody is free to ask any questions, because if you have that confidence in yourself and your motives for taking decisions, there can be no ambiguity. And if you can just stick to that line, I think we'll have a relatively successful time ahead of us. So thank you very much, and it's been a pleasure being here this afternoon.